Chapter 6. More on CSS. Introduction. In the previous chapter, you built a basic understanding of CSS, cascading style sheets, and learned how to use basic elements and background properties. This chapter will explore more advanced CSS concepts, such as CSS gradient, animations, and transitions. Learning these advanced techniques will help you make more interesting websites, improving the user's experience. CSS gradient. Gradients are CSS elements that show transitions between two or more colors, where one color gradually fades into another. Using the gradient property in CSS, you can create visually appealing images. There are three types of gradients: A. Linear gradients, B. Radial gradients, C. Conic gradients. A. Linear gradient, the most common type of CSS gradient, allowing you to control the color transition using directions and angles. The syntax for applying a linear gradient is background image, linear gradient, direction, color 1, color 2, times direction, defines the direction of the gradient. It can be specified in degrees, example 45 deg, using keywords to right, to bottom, etc., or as a combination of both. Times color specifies the colors at specific points along the gradient. These can include multiple colors. CSS gradients use background image properties to apply gradients. Besides, you can specify directions and two or more colors for transitioning. Example of a linear gradient. Explanation 1. Tag. The tag is used to define CSS styles within an HTML document. 2. Hash linear grad selector. The hash linear grad is an ID selector in CSS. It applies the specified styles to the HTML element with the ID is equal to linear grad attribute 3. Height to 50px. This sets the height of the element to 250 pixels. 4. Background image, linear gradient, green, red. This defines a linear gradient as the background image of the element. The linear gradient, green, red, function creates a gradient that starts with green at the top and transitions to red at the bottom. You can also change the direction of linear gradient using the following: I. Background image, linear gradient, to right, green, red, 2. Background image, linear gradient, to bottom, green, red. You can also use angles instead of directions. The syntax for the same is given below: dash, background image, linear gradient, angle, color 1, color 2, background image, linear gradient, 60 deg, green, red, B. Radial gradient. These gradients radiate outward from a central point, creating an elliptical color transitions. This allows for smooth blending from the center to the outer edges. Explanation 1. Hash radial grad selector. The hash radial grad is an ID selector in CSS. It applies the specified styles to the HTML element with the ID is equal to radial grad attribute 2. Height to 50px. This sets the height of the element to 250 pixels. 3. Width 350px. This sets the width of the element to 350 pixels. 4. Background image, a radial gradient, red, yellow, green. This defines a radial gradient as the background image of the element. The radial gradient, red, yellow, green, function creates a gradient that starts from the center of the element and radiates outward. The gradient begins with red in the center, transitions to yellow, and finally transitions to green at the outer edges. You can also create a radial gradient with differently spaced color. For example, background image, a radial gradient, green 20%, red 35%, yellow 45%. C. Conic gradient. These gradient create a circular color transition around a central point, forming a cone-like shape, enabling seamless blending around a circle. Explanation 1. Hush Conic Grad Selector. The Hush Conic Grad is an ID selector in CSS. It applies the specified styles to the HTML element with the ID is equal to conic grad attribute to dot height to 50 px. This sets the height of the element to 250 pixels, 3 dot width 350 px. This sets the width of the element to 350 pixels, 4 dot background dash image conic gradient red, yellow, green. This defines a conic gradient as the background image of the element. The conic gradient, red, yellow, green, function creates a gradient that rotates around the center of the element. The gradient starts at the top center, 0 degrees, with red, transitions to yellow, and then to green, completing a circular pattern. CSS transition. CSS transitions involve changing the properties of elements, such as color, size, and position, over a specified duration. You can control various aspects of the transition using the following properties. Explanation 1. Div selector. The div selector applies the specified styles to all elements in the HTML document. To width 150 px, sets the width of the element to 150 pixels. 3. Height 150 px, sets the height of the element to 150 pixels. 4. Background pink, sets the background color of the element to pink. The element has a width of 150 pixels and a height of 150 pixels with a pink background. 5. Transition property. Width specifies that the transition effect will apply to the width property of the element. When the width changes, the transition effect will be triggered. 6. Transition duration. 1s sets the duration of the transition effect to 1 second. This means that the width change will take 1 second to complete. 7. Transition timing function. Linear specifies the timing function of the transition. The linear value means the transition will proceed at a constant speed from start to finish. CSS animation. CSS animations are a powerful tool for controlling the motion and display of web page elements. They are composed of two main parts: the animation description and keyframes that define the animation properties at specific intervals, such as start, end, etc. You can specify how an element's appearance and behavior should change over time using the @keyframes rule. You use the following CSS animations properties to apply animations to the elements. Explanation. The above code demonstrates a simple CSS animation that changes the background color of an element over time. Times a element with a width and height of 250 pixels and an initial pink background color is displayed. Times after a 2-second delay, the animation starts and lasts for 5 seconds. Times during the animation, the background color of the changes smoothly. Times from pink to yellow at 25% of the animation duration. Times from yellow to blue at 50% of the animation duration. Times from blue to green at 100% of the animation duration. Times the animation progresses linearly, meaning the color changes occur at a constant speed.